The sun was setting in Huntsville, Texas, and inside a small concrete cell, 28-year-old Michael James Perry was living out the final hours of his life. He had less than one day to breathe, to blink, to pray. In just a few hours, he'd be strapped to a gurney and pumped full of lethal drugs, executed for a triple murder so senseless, it stunned even hardened detectives. But if you'd seen him at trial years earlier, you wouldn't think he was afraid. He laughed. He smirked. He smiled in the face of grieving families. To them, he was a monster in a teenager's body. But Perry insisted he was innocent. He told journalists. He told documentary filmmakers. He told God. He said he was framed, that he didn't pull the trigger, that his past was broken, yes, but he didn't kill anyone. Yet here he was, a death warrant signed, his name etched into the execution schedule, with no more appeals left to file. What does a man like that do when the clock starts ticking? When every sound, the rattle of keys, the shuffle of boots down the corridor, could be the one that leads to the death chamber. What goes through your mind when your final meal arrives? When your mother visits you one last time, knowing she'll never touch you again. And in the end, what do you say when the warden leans in and asks, "Do you have any final words?" This is not just a story of crime and punishment. It's about a boy who grew up broken, a woman who opened her home to him, and the betrayal that ended 3 innocent lives in a single night. And it's about what happens when that same boy, now a condemned man, faces his final sunset. This is the final 24 hours of Michael James Perry. Today's story is about a young man who was executed at just 28 years old. Honestly, you could say he never truly lived. Maybe it was fate. Maybe it was a tragic chain of choices. But in the end, 4 lives were lost, 3 in 2001 and his in 2010, all because of a car and youthful recklessness. He was only 19 when he pulled the trigger, and spent just 8 years on death row. Not even a full decade. While other inmates wait decades, some over 30 years for their execution dates, the state moved swiftly to end his life. Why the rush? Michael James Perry remains one of the youngest people ever executed in the United States, and his case still leaves behind haunting questions. Before he became the name etched onto a death warrant, Michael James Perry was just a troubled boy lost inside the cracks of the system. Born in 1982 in Texas, Perry never really stood a chance. His biological parents gave him up before he was old enough to walk. He was adopted as an infant by Carlton and Sandra Perry, a stable, middle-class couple who had every intention of giving him a better life. They raised him in a quiet Houston suburb, good schools, clean neighborhood, church on Sundays. But Michael wasn't like other kids. By the time he hit kindergarten, he was already different. Teachers said he couldn't sit still. He'd lash out when corrected, throw tantrums over the smallest things. At home, he was impulsive, explosive, one moment smiling, the next throwing chairs. His adoptive parents tried everything: pediatricians, therapists, church counselors. They put him on medication, pulled him from public school, and placed him in specialized programs. But nothing stuck. Every attempt to fix him ended in another outburst, another disciplinary meeting, another label added to his file. By the time Michael turned 12, the word uncontrollable showed up in his records. At 14, he was smoking weed and running away from home. At 15, he stole a car. At 16, he was in and out of juvenile detention, each time harder than before, angrier, more detached. And by 17, Michael Perry had already become what some people whispered behind closed doors: a ticking time bomb. But it wasn't all chaos. At times, Michael was charming, even likable. He could mimic normalcy with eerie precision. He smiled in photos. He made small talk. Sometimes, he'd talk about wanting to turn his life around. But the moment pressure hit, it was like a mask fell away. His adoptive parents, worn down and heartbroken, still tried to reach him. They funded his trips to Christian rehab centers. They bailed him out. They prayed over him. But it wasn't enough. By 19, Michael was on his own, couch surfing, taking drugs, drifting between friends, shelters, and cheap motels. One of those friends was Jason Burkett, a quiet, awkward young man whose own life was no fairy tale. The two met at a drug rehab facility and bonded quickly. Perry was the loud, reckless leader. Burkett was the quiet tag-along. Together, they spiraled. They started stealing from stores, breaking into homes, scamming strangers for gas money. But that wasn't enough. They wanted more. Fast money, escape, power. And that's when Michael remembered someone from his past. A kind woman named Sandra Stotler. Someone who had once let him into her home when he needed help. She had fed him, let him sleep in a warm bed, treated him like family. And she had something he wanted, a shiny red Camaro. Michael decided they were going to take it. But first, they had to get through her. The night of October 24th, 2001, began with a plan, simple, desperate, lethal. 19-year-olds Michael James Perry and Jason Aaron Burkett, fueled by addiction and fueled by greed, drove into the gated neighborhood of Bentwater, the Woodlands, Montgomery County, Texas, with one goal: steal a car. They rang the doorbell of Sandra Stotler, a 50-year-old nurse who once showed Perry kindness. Burkett asked to use the phone. Perry slipped inside through the garage, shotgun in hand. Hidden behind boxes in the laundry room, he waited. When Sandra came to answer the back door, he fired twice. The shots echoed final. They wrapped her body in bedsheets and drove it to Crater Lake, near Grangerland, dumping her lifeless form into the murky water. But the night wasn't over. Walking the dark streets back to their truck, they realized something chilling. They still didn't have the Camaro's keys. And her son, Adam Stotler, 16, and his friend Jeremy Richardson, 18, were likely to return home. They watched, waited, and struck again. Burkett knocked on the front door later that night, pretending to be in trouble. When Adam and Jeremy arrived, they all piled into a vehicle. Perry and Jason telling a fabricated story about a friend injured in the woods. The four drove to a wooded area off Honia Egypt Road. There, alone and defenseless, Adam and Jeremy were ambushed. Burkett shot Jeremy, then Adam, each with merciless precision. Perry didn't intervene. They returned to the Stotler home in Adam's Isuzu Rodeo, collected Sandra's red Camaro, and fled, cleaning themselves up before heading to a bar. In the days that followed, surveillance caught Perry in the Camaro using Sandra's credit cards at a Spring, Texas gas station. His arrogance would be his downfall, or his arrest. A traffic stop led to a chase. The stolen vehicle crashed. Perry fled but was caught, carrying Adam's wallet and stealing his identity. He was released on bond, under the name Adam. Meanwhile, fishermen recovered Sandra's body. Later, while in jail, tensions flared. Perry raged and became violent. He tried to bite an officer who restrained him. Burkett, calmer but defiant, insisted blame belonged solely on Perry. After interrogation, Perry confessed. He gave details only the killers would know, leading investigators to the bodies of Sandra, Adam, and Jeremy. At the Montgomery County Courthouse in Conroe, Texas, the prosecution built a damning case. The charge, capital murder, for killing Sandra during a robbery and then butchering her son, Adam Stotler, 16, and his friend Jeremy Richardson, 18, to silence witnesses. But the trial itself became a spectacle. Perry sat stone-faced, sometimes smirking, even chuckling during the presentation of graphic evidence. One newspaper reported he laughed at witness testimony and showed no remorse when shown bloody crime scene photos. When it came to blame, Burkett pointed directly at Michael. He admitted pulling the trigger on the boys, but said Perry was the one who had planned and executed the murders, especially Sandra's killing. Perry retaliated, claiming his confessions were coerced and that he was high during questioning. Perry maintained he hadn't pulled the trigger. The jury deliberated for just 2 hours before finding Perry guilty of capital murder in February 2003. Sentencing took another 6 hours. The verdict, death by lethal injection. The jurors cited the cruelty of the acts and his lack of remorse. In contrast, Jason Burkett's defense opted for a life sentence. During his trial, Burkett's father, Delbert, begged the jury to spare his son, acknowledging his broken upbringing. This emotional plea swayed 2 jurors. Burkett was spared the death penalty, sentenced to life with a minimum of 40 years before parole eligibility. That stark difference, death for Perry, life for Burkett, echoed through the courtroom and captured national attention. Both men convicted of the same murders, but one faced execution while the other remained alive. Michael James Perry, convicted at 21, was sent to the Huntsville Unit in Livingston, Texas. home to Texas male death row inmates. He would remain there until justice, or retribution, caught up to him. From the moment he stepped inside, Perry's world became a cage of concrete, steel, and silence. His new home was a 6 by 10-foot cell, sealed with solid doors. No bars, no windows, just fluorescent lights, cold cement walls, and a narrow slot in the door where food trays slid through like offerings to the forgotten. Here, there were no roommates, no conversations, no physical touch. Perry spent 23 hours a day in solitary confinement, allowed only a single hour outside, alone in a fenced cage known as the recreation yard, surrounded by razor wire and watched by armed guards. The noise was constant but meaningless. The buzz of overhead lights, the clanking of steel doors, the occasional echo of another inmate shouting into the void. But inside those walls, time stopped meaning anything. Perry arrived at Polunsky at just 20 years old, his head still shaved, his body still lean from youth. But the years began to layer over him like dust in a forgotten room. 21, 23, 25, 28. Each birthday marked not by celebration, but by another rejected appeal. He wrote letters, some to family, some to strangers, some to journalists. Many went unanswered. Others brought unexpected conversations with people who didn't want revenge, just understanding. His adoptive mother visited him when she could, speaking to him through thick glass under tight supervision. She held on to the boy she remembered, the broken child lost long before the murders. Over time, Perry started writing about faith. He claimed he had found God in his cell. He said he had repented, that he wasn't afraid of death because he believed in redemption. Some who read his letters believed him. Others called it manipulation, a final act of survival from a man with nowhere left to go. In 2010, German filmmaker Werner Herzog came to Texas to create a documentary about death row. He interviewed Perry for what would become Into the Abyss, a film exploring life, crime, and the morality of capital punishment. In the interview, Perry appeared calm, almost serene. He denied his guilt again, saying, "I didn't kill anyone." He claimed the system had failed him, that his trial was unfair, and that Jason Burkett had lied to save himself. But behind those words, behind that camera, Perry was running out of time. The courts had rejected his last federal appeal. His legal team filed an emergency motion to the U.S. Supreme Court, citing mental health concerns and the possibility of a wrongful conviction. It was denied. The state of Texas scheduled his execution for July 1, 2010, to be carried out at the Huntsville Unit, known simply as the Walls Unit. It's the oldest prison in Texas and home to its execution chamber. In the weeks leading up to that date, Perry's days grew quieter. He stopped answering most mail. He prayed with chaplains more often. He watched as other men walked toward death ahead of him, some crying, some silent, some screaming. He told a chaplain he wasn't afraid to die, that he was ready. But those who had seen Perry before said something had changed in his eyes, something hollow, distant, like he had already left the world in pieces. And when the final week arrived, Perry folded his hands, stared at the ceiling of his death watch cell, and waited for the last sunrise of his life. July 1, 2010, 5 a.m. Inside the Huntsville Unit, known as the Walls Unit, Michael James Perry opened his eyes for the last time. The death watch cell, just steps from the execution chamber, was silent except for the hum of fluorescent lights and the shuffle of correctional officers beginning their shifts. There was no sunrise to greet him, just gray walls, steel bars, and the smell of state-issued bleach. A guard knocked gently on the steel door. "It's time." Perry nodded. No words. 6 a.m. A tray slid through the door. Scrambled eggs, toast, oatmeal, and milk. Perry picked at the food. Not out of hunger, but out of routine. He left most of it untouched. 8 a.m. He showered slowly, carefully, washing himself as if preparing for something sacred. When he returned, he dressed not in a prison jumpsuit, but in a clean white uniform, standard issue for the condemned. 9:30 a.m. Perry asked for pen and paper. He began writing quietly. The guards didn't ask what he wrote. Some say it was a final letter to his mother. Others believe it was a 12:30 p.m. A surprise visit. His mother had arrived. They sat across from each other, glass between them, phones pressed to their ears. For the first time that day, Perry's face cracked. His voice trembled. His shoulders shifted under the weight of goodbye. Observers said he didn't plead innocence. He didn't talk about the case. He just listened, nodded, cried. 1:30 p.m. She was escorted away, tears streaming, her face pale and broken. Perry didn't watch her leave. He stared at the floor for nearly 10 minutes. 3:30 p.m. His last meal arrived. He had requested 3 bacon, egg, and cheese omelets, 3 chicken cheese enchiladas, 3 sodas, 1 Pepsi, 1 Coca-Cola, 1 Dr. Pepper. He took his time. No one rushed him. He chewed slowly, but barely finished half. It wasn't about hunger, it was about control. One final choice. 5:45 p.m. The door opened. 4 officers entered. Calm, practiced, professional. Stand up. Perry rose quietly. He was escorted down the final hallway, the death walk. Just 30 feet, but the longest of his life. Through one steel door. Then another. Then into a pale green room chilled by air conditioning and tension. The execution chamber. He climbed onto the gurney himself. No resistance. No struggle. Officers strapped down his ankles, wrists, and chest. A needle was inserted into each arm. On one side of the glass, his mother and an aunt. On the other, the family of Sandra Stotler, the woman he murdered in the Woodlands, Texas. 6 p.m. The warden leaned in. "Do you have any final words?" Michael's voice trembled. "I want everyone to know what happened here, this atrocity. You are forgiven by me." He turned toward the glass. "Mom, I love you. Dad, I'm coming home." His dad died few weeks before his execution. A tear slipped from his eye. It would be his last. 6:02 p.m. The sedative began to flow. His eyes fluttered. His chest rose and fell. Once. Twice. A soft gasp. Then stillness. The room was silent, save for the quiet weeping of a mother on one side, and the breathless relief of a daughter on the other. 6:17 p.m. A physician entered. Checked his vitals. Pronounced dead. Michael James Perry. Age 28. Executed by lethal injection in Huntsville, Texas. Outside, the media recorded it as the 14th execution in Texas that year. A footnote. A statistic. But inside those walls, it was much more. 1 life ended. 3 others long gone. And a legacy of pain that would haunt 2 families forever. By the time the sun dipped below the Texas horizon on July 1, 2010, Michael James Perry had been dead for less than an hour. The gurney had been cleared. The chamber was silent. His body had been removed through a back hallway, tagged, and processed for transport. There were no crowds. No protesters. No vigil. Just a vacant death watch cell. A mother leaving the prison in tears. And the sharp, final punctuation of a system that believes some crimes demand the ultimate price. For the family of Sandra Stotler, there was no celebration. Her daughter, Lisa, later told reporters, "Going in, I thought it would be worse. And I felt sorry for the family. It's not a good day for anybody." She paused, then added, "I needed to see if he was the monster I built him up to be. Apparently he is." For Perry's adoptive mother, the execution closed the door on a life she once hoped to save. A boy she raised. A son she prayed for. A young man who turned into someone she could no longer understand. 3 people died in the Woodlands in 2001. Sandra Stotler, a kind woman who once showed mercy. Her son Adam, 17 years old with his whole life ahead. Jeremy Richardson, just a friend in the wrong place at the wrong time. And 9 years later, one more life ended in Huntsville. Not as an act of justice everyone agreed with. Not as healing for those left behind. But as the final chapter in a tragedy that had no real winners. Only survivors and silence. Some still debate whether Perry was truly guilty of all 3 murders. He maintained his innocence until the end. But the evidence, the eyewitnesses, the surveillance, and the stolen car all pointed in one direction. But what I don't understand is why his accomplice life was spared and his was not. As far as I am concerned, he is also guilty of the same crimes. He also pulled the trigger, Yeah, the criminal justice system sucks. Only those who knows how to play the system wins. And when the drugs flowed through his veins on that summer evening, the state of Texas carried out what it believed to be justice. This is the end of Michael Perry life. Please subscribe, like, and comment. Thank you for watching.